And it seemed to me that every day there was somebody who was driving a black BMW with blacked out windows, who was driving up right behind people and then moving to one side and then moving to another side and just trying to get forward, doing that the whole time, getting that tiny, tiny, tiny bit forward. And I slowly but surely learned to hate them. And I developed what was my commute sustaining fantasy. And in my commute sustaining fantasy, I decided that these were completely bad people. And this is what happens in my fantasy. I'm driving along, they're up behind me. They see a gap to the left, they go in the gap to the left, drive along, then they cut right in front of me in my Prius, king of the road, 227,000 miles on it at this moment in time. And you are brave to cut me up because my car looks like I'm a man who does not care about cars. And then they see another gap and they move to the left. But then the traffic flow changes. It changes and I gradually draw alongside him. And in my commute sustaining fantasy, I take my wheel and I start to turn it to the left. And as I turn it to the left, I bring my car next to his car. I bring my car next to his car and I keep turning. So we start to touch and I push his car to the side. He can't go anywhere because he's in traffic flow and there's traffic everywhere. And I push his car to the side and there is this screech of metal on metal as he hits the barrier at the side. And I keep going and keep going and keep going and there's sparks flying and the whole thing is going crazy and it's shrieking the metal. And eventually we stop. And when we've stopped, I've got him up against the side of the wall. So he can't open the doors on the passenger side. And my car is against his car on the driver's side. And in my fantasy, I get out the car, I walk around the back, I pop the boot, and I take out my baseball bat. I apologize to the other drivers. I walk around the front, I have a look at the headlights, and then I smack one out, and then I smack the other one out, and then I walk back around. I look at the rear of his car and I smack out one light, then the other light, and then I consider my pièce de résistance, which is climbing up onto his car, climbing along the top, looking down over at him through the windscreen and smacking his windscreen. I consider it, but I don't do it because I am not an animal. What I do then is I put my baseball bat back in the back of my car. I turn around, I take the polite applause of my fellow commuters who also hate this guy. And then I get back in my car and I drive off. And I never did it, but I am a Scottish middle-aged man. You know, I'm not that far away from anger at any time. And that sustained me on my drive until one day when I was driving up off the Aston Expressway and going into the tunnels, and it's a big long right-hander, I looked to my left and I saw Birmingham Children's Hospital. And I realized that by the time you see it, you may well be past the junction to come off to go to it. And that actually, I had no idea what was going on inside those cars because they were BMWs with blacked out windows. I had no idea what was going on in other people's minds. And actually, they could have been driving into Birmingham with a sick child in the back. They could have been driving in to see a sick child. It could well be that by the time they saw Birmingham Children's Hospital, that they were past it and they were now panicked and they had to get there sooner. And I went away and I read about it. And what I was displaying was something called fundamental attribution error. And what it is this. When we see somebody doing a thing that we think is bad, we assume they are bad people, which makes sense out in the savannah. It doesn't really make so much sense when you're beginning to work in complicated and complex environments. And the interesting thing about fundamental attribution error is it has a twin. Its mirror twin called the illusion of transparency. And that is that when we do something that other people might think is a bad thing, when we do that thing, we assume that other people will know that we only did it because it's the least worst thing we could do in that situation, that we are good people and that's what we're doing. But the evidence is overwhelming that what happens is when we see this happening by other people, we assume that they are bad, and we fill up the gap between fundamental attribution error and the illusion of transparency with the idea that the other person is bad. And we do that unless we talk and explain what's going on. And the bottom line to me about the misunderstanding stuff is that we understand far less than we think about each other. And we go further. We attribute intentions to others, which are completely wrong. And we add to their reputation through that, and we do it erroneously. And if we could move ourselves from assuming that people are trying to do the wrong thing, because it turns out that not very many people are really trying to do the wrong thing. Many people do the wrong things, but they're not trying to do the wrong thing. If we can move from assuming malicious intent to assuming positive intent, then we open the doors to understanding people a lot better. And if we can move from assuming stupidity to assuming that people were trying to do the best thing that they could in the circumstances, then we help to understand things better. I should mention, I've already touched on this, there is one group of people who have far greater reputational reach, and that's senior people. And we don't feel it creeping up on us. We don't recognize it. We still see ourselves the way that we've always seen ourselves. We know that we don't know everything. And what the evidence says is that as you become more and more senior, you tend to look up, not down. You look up and you're aware of the constraints on your world, and you forget the impact that you have on people below you, because no matter who you are on this call, no matter where you sit in the hierarchy at this moment in time, if you think back to what you thought of somebody in your position, say 5, 10, 15 years ago, if you think back to what you thought about that person then, that's how those people think of you just now. That's how important our words and our actions are to the people who are below us hierarchically, of equal value as human beings, but they don't have as much impact in the workplace as we do because we're senior. And how we behave and how we treat other people really matters, and how they think we treat them matters. So, just to sum it up, reputations matter. And to a large extent, we can be in charge of that. We will understand other people's reputations better when we don't assume malicious intent. And when we get into civilized discourse, civil discourse with them, when we ask and try to understand what was going on when they did X, Y, or Z, but don't assume that they are either stupid or deliberately doing a bad thing, because that is extremely unlikely. And my last question for you to ponder is, my reputation my theme tune had become the theme tune to Jaws with the registrar. What's your reputation going to be, and what's your theme tune going to be? Thank you very much. Let me see if I can find a way of not sharing my screen with you anymore. I have this terrifying moment when there's a bit of silence at the far end of it, and I think, holy crap, is anybody else there, or have I spoken to the little green light on my computer for the last half hour and nobody was out there?
Thank you very much, Chris. That's a really moving story to listen to, and really good to hear you speak. Slightly different theme from some of the more clinical presentations earlier in the day, but certainly no less valuable, I don't think. and hopefully something for us all to take forward in what we do. The chat box is still open. I don't know if you're available for questions for a few moments, Chris. Yeah. We are almost up to time. I'm just trying to keep up with them. So there's a question about how do you suggest starting the conversation if someone appears to lack insight into their own behaviour?
Okay. There's a lot of ways around this. The first thing is that if you're the recipient of negative behaviours, you're probably not the right person to have the conversation. Even though we get told as children that we should, and as adults we feel it's our responsibility to face up to these guys, it probably doesn't work. There's years and years and years of research into this. So how do we let people know? The first thing is to assume positive intent in their actions. And the second thing is to help people to hold a mirror up. Because if you believe that behavior matters, then actually most of us want to be seen as doing the right thing and trying to help the team to perform at their best. So that means that you need to have conversations that let people know that whatever happened, other people felt stressed by it. And there's a really key question. I got this question from my pal Trevor Dale, who has a company called A-Trainability. And the question is this: how do you think that made them feel? And that's it. When we ask somebody, how do you think that made other people feel when that happened? And we let them think about it. Because an awful lot of the time what happens is that people become overwhelmed. And as we're overwhelmed, our bandwidth closes down and we become a different version of ourselves, because the sort of kind, soft edges of us tend to fall out, and everybody understands that in situations like trauma. But if we're causing people to be distressed, overstressed, then we push them over the stress performance curve. That's not what any of us want as leaders. So finding ways to hold the mirror up to let people think about it. And then there's a ton of stuff you can do once people actually want to learn about it and want to think about how they're going to behave into the future.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Few more comments, but I think in terms of time, we're probably out of time anyway. Really nice talk to end the session on there. Thank you, Chris. And thank you to all of the speakers. Thank you to everyone who's contributed to today. Also to Caroline for corralling the questions, and for Sarah for setting things up. And a few people have asked through the day about access to the presentation. So we have recorded most or all of what's happened. So we will put that up on the website, on the Central England Trauma Network website. So that will be available sometime in the near future. If you would be kind enough, thank you all for attending, and hopefully you found it useful, interesting, informative, inspiring, or some of those. If you could please give us some feedback so that we can work on this for next time, in terms of content, style, presentation, and so on. Anything you'd like to say, that would be really good. And if you would like a certificate of attendance, if you drop your email into that same form, the final question, then we will get that out to you as soon as we're able to. So again, thank you very much for everyone for taking part in the day. I'm going to stay online for a few more minutes if anyone has anything they want to put in the chat. Otherwise, thanks very much, and enjoy your afternoon and the weekend.